بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. في هذا الصباح الجميل وفي اليوم الثاني من أيام المعرض والمنتدى الدولي للتعليم، نرحب بكم أجمل ترحيب، ونبدأ معكم في هذا اليوم بأحد المتحدثين الرسميين في هذا المنتدى، وهو أستاذ من جامعة فلوريدا في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، وستكون محاضرته بعنوان محفزات انتقال المعلمين إلى مجتمع المعرفة. محاضرنا اليوم هو أحد الأساتذة المتخصصين في تصميم التعليم والتخطيط لتصميم التدريس. ألف مجموعة من الكتب في هذا المجال، كذلك عمل في العديد من الجامعات المختلفة داخل الولايات المتحدة وخارجها، وشارك في الكثير من المؤتمرات والندوات، وحصل على عدد من الجوائز والمراتب الشرفية، ويعمل مستشاراً في العديد من المجلات العلمية من ناحية التدقيق على المقالات العلمية. هذه المحاضرة ربما تصب في موضوع يهم الجميع، وهو محفزات المعلمين، ولكن هذه المحفزات باتجاه تحويل المجتمع المدرسي أو المجتمع التعليمي إلى مجتمع المعرفة. وكما تعلمون فإن هناك توجه عام، سواء كان على مستوى وزارة التربية والتعليم أو على مستوى المؤسسات التعليمية المختلفة في المملكة، للتحول إلى مجتمع المعرفة والاقتصاد المعرفي. وتسعى وزارة التربية والتعليم إلى التحول إلى مجتمع المعرفة خلال 10 سنوات القادمة، ولذلك حرص المنتدى بما أنه يكون أو هذا العام عام المعلم، وكما تلاحظون أن المعلم هو العنصر الرئيس في هذا المنتدى وفي هذا العام لوزارة التربية والتعليم، تم اختيار المحاضرات أو المتحدثين في الموضوعات التي تناسب وتساعد في تغيير التفكير وتحفيز المعلمين للانتقال إلى المرحلة القادمة بما يتطلبها الانتقال إلى مجتمع المعرفة. لن نأخذ الكثير من الوقت في تقديم المحاضر، ولكن نتمنى لكم وقتا ممتعا، وسيكون هناك في نهاية الجلسة 10 دقائق أو ربع ساعة تقريبا على حسب وقت المحاضر للمداخلات أو طرح الأسئلة على محاضرنا اليوم. On behalf of the Ministry of Education, I would like to welcome Professor John and thank him for coming to our international forum and exhibition for education. And I would like to give you the floor to start your presentation. Yes.
Well, good morning. It's my pleasure and honor to be here at this conference. I want to thank the members of the Ministry of Education and other people who have made it possible for this to happen. I want to extend my greetings to the ladies and gentlemen who are here this morning. And I especially want to thank Dr. Abdullah Al-Harbi for his recommendation for me to be at this conference. So with that in mind, I'm looking forward to sharing some of my ideas with you and hearing your reactions. The title of my presentation is Motivational Challenges in the Transition from a transition-type society to a knowledge-based education system. I think the light's not on this. This is not working. Ah, okay. This, okay. Thank you. The central theme of my presentation is represented in this forethought, and the question it asks is, how can you identify and solve motivational problems in the development of a knowledge-based education system? School systems are highly resistant to change. Virtually all organizations are resistant to change, but it can be especially difficult with school systems which are grounded in decades and probably centuries of tradition that determine what the curriculum contains and how it is taught. However, change is possible, and even though there are many, many things required to help bring change about, changes in structural elements of the system, changes in incentive systems, changes in philosophy, and changes in directions from the authorities that govern the policies of the system. However, I think that one of the central issues in bringing about change is motivation. At the very bottom of the challenges for all of this to happen, or I should say at the top, is the question of how much do the people want it to happen. The teachers, in particular, have to be deeply and intrinsically motivated for the changes to occur in order for them to be successful. All right? You can have a top-down arrangement where the officials in the system determine what changes they want, but unless the teachers are highly motivated to bring the changes about, it probably will not be highly successful. Now, Okay, so in this presentation, I have four major topics. The first one covers the characteristics of knowledge-based systems and the role of motivation. Then I will talk about some of the motivational challenges that occur, how the model applies to teachers and students, and what are the requirements of the administrators. Each of them has an important role to play. And first topic, what are the characteristics of knowledge-based systems and the role of motivation? All right, implications for knowledge growth. In order for knowledge-based systems to succeed, there are several basic requirements. This is reflected in all of the literature that I've read about knowledge-based systems. One of the first requirements, or final requirements, is that the students must accept a personal obligation for learning. Everyone has to become intrinsically motivated for the changes, as well as the teachers. There are group and organizational requirements to bring about the change. These people cannot be successful working in isolation. If we were to examine your school system right now, I guarantee, or I feel very confident, that we would find many teachers who are already doing some of the things that represent the characteristics of a knowledge-based system. But having a few people who are succeeding in doing these things in isolation from each other will not bring about system-wide change. So everybody has to be working toward these changes and support each other in the process. Also, there would be a shift to more virtual classrooms and digital learning environments. The traditional walls of the classroom will break down, disappear. Yesterday in the panel discussion, I mentioned an example that one of my former students is doing with the use of Twitter to include people outside the classroom in the discussions within the classroom. This adds richness to the experiences of the students and more depth to the content itself. Now, by breaking down the walls, talking about virtual classrooms, I am not simply talking about online instruction or distance learning. In my experience at the University of at Florida State University, and in talking with people at other universities, when they adopt online or blended learning systems and they make these capabilities available to the professors, what do the professors do? They take their lectures and they put them on the online system. So it's still the old system, but simply delivered electronically rather than face-to-face. So what I'm talking about are the incorporation of the capabilities of digital-based systems to change and expand the ways we teach and learn. The next point I want to make has to do with the use of what are called electronic performance support systems. Oh, I forgot to advance my slide. Okay, this is a review of what I just talked about. The personal obligations for learning, group and organizational requirements, virtual classrooms and digital learning environments, and then next point is instant job support, electronic performance support systems. These systems were developed in the context of business and industry, and they make a variety of resources available to the individual worker. I visited a bank system, Citibank Corporation, customer service center in the center of the United States in North Dakota. And these were people who were working electronically to answer calls from customers, respond to those calls, tell the customers what they could do, what they could not do, and so forth. And at the workstation, you could see that sometimes the bank representative, the customer service representative, would receive a question that she did not immediately know the answer to. Well, on her computer, she could click on a help system, and very quickly, the system would inform her with the information that she needed. It also provided her with a variety of tools to enable her to do a good job. Now, in a school system, these performance support systems, or EPSSs, can be made available to teachers by providing them with productivity software, such as lesson planning templates, presentation media, databases, and so forth, graphics files, clip art. Well, these things are already available on most teachers' computers. But what is not typically available would be expert help systems, brief tutorials that would help a teacher refresh her knowledge of a content area that she had not taught in quite a while. She could click on it to get suggestions for learning activities and motivational strategies that other people have used. All of these performance support tools and applications could be called up efficiently by the teacher as she plans her lessons. Similarly, these performance support systems can be made available to students as they work on their projects individually and in groups, so that they on the computer, of course, have access to information databases such as Wikipedia and other things, but also that they can get expert help, advice, and other kinds of performance support tools. One of the examples that I'll mention in a moment involves some elementary school students, fourth graders at Memorial Elementary School in the United States. And their teacher, who had become an assistant principal, worked with them to develop podcasts. These podcasts were presented every morning at the school, and they became so successful that these students and their supervisor were invited to a major conference in San Diego, California, to demonstrate what they had done. And this is a very good example of using knowledge in the knowledge-directed system rather than just having them acquire and repeat things they had learned. All right, well, what is the current situation with respect to activities that support a knowledge-directed system? Well, first of all, we already have available a large number of technologies and social media that can be used to support the development of a knowledge-based approach. The nice thing about this is that with the availability of contemporary technology, computers, applications, internet, once you have the basic infrastructure, of the computer systems and internet access, it's not expensive to gain access to the tools that help support the knowledge-based system. However, there's one major obstacle in this, as in any change management process, and that's motivation. These changes will not occur unless people really want them to happen. We can provide many examples of these changes. What I have done in the last few weeks, I've collected a large stack of specific projects and activities that have been reported on, describing the activities of various teachers. One of the key principles of the knowledge-based system is that we teach students how to use the content that they're working with, not just memorize it and repeat it. So it's a culture of doing things, not just knowing things. And I find over and over again from the ISTE website and from other online websites examples of this. Let's see. Preparing teachers and students to succeed in an open-ended future. You know, yesterday several comments were made about the fact that we can't teach people everything they're going to need to know in order to successfully complete a career. We can't teach them everything they're going to need to know to successfully complete the first 2 or 3 years of many careers, because things are changing so quickly. So we face an uncertain future. So what we have to do is help students learn how to be generators of their own knowledge, self-regulate themselves, and know how to use what they already know and are learning, and to build on that with new knowledge as appropriate. And so many of these activities that I have listed here represent that. Another common phrase is called flipping the classroom. Flipping the classroom. It's like flipping a coin, and it goes over and it comes down upside down. Well, some teachers are flipping the classroom by enabling the students to, in the class time, to become more project-oriented. And the teacher becomes more of a coach, a facilitator, and an advisor. And it's still necessary, of course, for students to learn basic skills, basic foundational knowledge, in order to be able to work in a sophisticated way on many of the problems that they're presented with. But a lot of this can be done outside of the classroom. Instead of simply lecturing in the classroom, students can read tutorials online, they can read background information online, the teacher can conduct a review at the beginning of the class meeting, and then transition into activities which require students to apply that knowledge in the development of projects that enable them to further develop their own knowledge and skills. So flipping the classroom, and I've got numerous other examples here that I could describe. All right, now, this presentation, in order to get at the bottom line of the intrinsic motivation to engage in change, will now focus to my second topic, which is identifying motivational challenges and a motivational design process. All right. And the focus of this is on teachers and students. The motivation of students is a challenging topic. Some teachers have a natural facility for engaging students in instruction. For many teachers, though, including myself when I was teaching secondary school, it's a challenge to understand the various motivational characteristics of students and to know how to keep them engaged in learning. The motivation literature is filled with many, many concepts and theories. And trying to use all of that knowledge in a systematic way to understand learner motivation is a big challenge. Teachers typically are very busy identifying, specific problems in their teaching environment. How am I going to teach this? What do I have to do to make it accessible to the learners? Next, finding time to bring about change. Teachers tend to be very, very busy grading papers, preparing new lesson plans, dealing with problems with individual students. And they complain, typically, many of them, that they do not have time to explore new ideas, new ways of teaching, and new topics. Plus, many teachers experience, what is called burnout. They become tired and exhausted from teaching the same topics, from meeting the many challenges of teaching, so it's difficult for them to keep their own motivation high. And plus, students have many motivational challenges in the classroom. Some are intrinsically motivated and eager to learn everything they can. But frequently, students ask the question, why should I have to learn this? Why is this topic important to me? I know it's a requirement, I know it's an obligation, but why should I have to learn this? I don't think it's valuable. Another problem with students, for example, that they face are problems with uncertainty and fear. I did a research project at Syracuse University one time in a junior high school. And we analyzed the motivation of students and then the teachers' perceptions of the students' motivation. We found over and over again, regardless of the topic, whether it was mathematics, art instruction, language instruction, social studies, the students had much higher fear of failure than the teachers realized. Because the students tend to put a mask over their face, a psychological mask. They don't reveal everything that's going on inside here and here. The teachers tended to be unaware of just how much fear the students had. Well, once they realized it, then they were able to modify their practices and approaches and help the students build more confidence. All right, so even if people want to bring about change, the challenge is how to do it. Many years ago, as an assistant professor at Syracuse, I felt challenged by this topic of motivation. It's something I had studied in my undergraduate work in philosophy, in literature, and when I taught high school, and even in my graduate program. But as I entered the profession of instructional systems design, I began to realize that we had a large amount of knowledge about how people learn, how to design learning environments, but we had very little knowledge about learner motivation. One of the cardinal principles put forth by the famous professor Robert Gagne in his Events of Instruction was to get the learner's attention, at the beginning. That's his number one step. But all that meant was to do something to get their attention. It could be a loud noise, it could be a change in the environment, something like that. The other principle that we had was reinforcement. The behavioral psychologists taught us some things about how to use reinforcement to sustain people's desired behaviors. Well, that was hardly sufficient in order to encompass all of the various facets of motivation. So I wanted to build what I called a holistic synthesis of motivational literature. And a holistic synthesis, meaning a synthesis that incorporated all of the important attributes of learner motivation. I also wanted to build that into a systematic design process. It's one thing to have a declarative knowledge, to have a body of knowledge that you can describe and discuss and talk about. But my primary concern was how to make it functional and useful by incorporating it into a systematic design process. All right? Well, we succeeded in that. And this process aids in the identification of specific motivational problems. It's one thing for a teacher to say, I'm interested in motivation. I want to do some things so that the students will like this instruction, and I want them to, to feel excited. But motivation, that's more of a one-dimensional approach. I'll use games, I'll use simulations, I'll use humor. But the real issue is, what are the motivational challenges being experienced by the student? How can you break that down analytically into specific motivational elements and then design strategies that are focused on the specific motivational elements where there are problems? This also reflects back on the teacher. Teachers face motivational challenges too. So the ARCS model helps them examine their own motivational profile and identify why they may not feel motivated to teach a particular topic, why they may feel frustrated, and then to come up with strategies to help them improve their own motivation. All right, based upon all of this work, it evolved into four basic principles, four basic categories. We found that motivation, the first requirement for motivation is to stimulate people's curiosity. In other words, build their attention, get their attention. But this occurs at a deeper level than just getting their attention. It's also necessary to sustain their curiosity and attention over time. And this refers to the attention category. So once you have an audience's attention, the next thing they're going to ask is, okay, you've got my interest, but why should I have to learn this? That is the relevance question. Why is this important for me? How is it going to be meaningfully related to my goals? So that's the next question to be asked and answered. All right, so those are the first two steps, getting attention and establishing the relevance of what you're teaching. The third step is confidence. The learner might say, okay, I'm interested, and yeah, I see this is important, but it doesn't matter. I can't learn this. I'm not good at mathematics. I'm not good at language. I'm not good at art, or I'm not good at whatever the topic is. So the third requirement to have motivated, fully engaged students is to build a positive sense of expectation for success, and that's the confidence dimension. If you can do those three things, then you will have the learners engaged in the learning process. And then the fourth category is reinforcement, and by this I mean something more than just behavioral conditioning reinforcement. I mean an intrinsically satisfying set of outcomes pertaining to what they've been learning. And this is, the work of Edward Deci and others focuses on self-determination theory and the applications of it in the learning process. And a lot of that relates to the development of intrinsic motivation. Now, where did these four categories come from? Well, when I began to review the motivational literature, as I said earlier, we found many concepts in the domain of human motivation. And what we did was a qualitative cluster analysis. We examined each of these concepts, curiosity, need for achievement, boredom, attribution theory, and all of the others listed up there. And based upon the attributes, as we analytically broke them down into their basic characteristics, we found that we could cluster them meaningfully into these four categories. And so that's what we did. Now, so the result of that was the theoretical foundation that led to the development of the ARCS model. I might add that this model has a high level of cross-cultural validity. The model is being used, it's already being used in parts of Saudi Arabia and has been for many years, Indonesia, Malaysia, Canada, Brazil, Turkey, Germany, the UK, the list goes on and on. But what I found is that even though the overall theoretical conceptual structure of the model transcends across cultures, the way in which it is used differs depending on the cultural environment. These four categories that I've presented to you are just the tips of the icebergs, the top of the profile. Underneath them are lists, which are represented in my publications, of more specific, detailed subcategories and subconcepts of motivation. And all of this provides a basis for generating motivational strategies and tactics that you can use in your preparing for teaching and your selection of teaching strategies. Now, what I find is that strategies that might be successful and popular in parts of the United States will be different in Japan or Malaysia or some other countries that have more of a focus on harmony than individual competition. The process of identifying motivational challenges is similar but the kinds of solutions you derive will differ based on the cultural context. All right, now this part of the ARCS model, which is what you normally see if you do a search on the web for my name and ARCS model, you'll find many people who have listed these 4 categories and subcategories and give examples of strategies. But the other part of the model that is very, very important is the design process itself. Now, the design process follows a typical problem-solving model, beginning with gathering background information. What is the gap? What is the gap between where we are and where we want to be? Let's analyze the situation to determine the causes of the gap and to look at the specific audience characteristics, environmental materials, and so forth, and then derive solutions that we can implement. You might have a class where the students are motivated to learn, where teachers are motivated to make changes. So the audience analysis, analyzing the audience, might reveal that they're highly motivated. But then when you analyze the environment, the availability of resources, the provision of enough time to make changes, the availability of models to support the change, you may find that they do not have the environmental supports that they require. And so then the process will not succeed because of some of these external structural and environmental constraints. So the analysis process requires not only that you look at individual motivation, but look at the various characteristics of their environment around it. Once you've identified the gaps, then you can design tactics and approaches to solve the problems. Now, in essence, this is similar to what Dr. Collin was talking about yesterday with Karl Popper, the philosopher, and the way they've built these design models around his process, these Popperian triads of gap identification, solution development, and then evaluation of results. And then the way his process moved forward through time, so that each time you implemented one of these triads, identified the degree to which you succeeded in accomplishing your goals and the degree to which there were gaps, then you move forward into another cycle until you progressively move closer to a solution that was acceptable. And this follows the traditional total quality control process of successive approximations and continuous improvement until you achieve your goals. All right, well, this is the overall generic design process. But within my publications, you'll find that there's a far more detailed representation of this. There's a 10-step process. Each step in this process has, in my publications, worksheets, templates that you can follow to fill in that guide you through the various steps. And these are available, and if you email me, I'll send you copies of some of these publications, or they're all represented in a book that I recently published that has a comprehensive representation of the ARCS model. Now, and you'll notice that the final step here is evaluate and revise, and that's similar to the third step in the Popperian process. You notice 3 of the steps are highlighted in blue. Those are what I would call the critical success factors, the critical success factors. It means that analyzing the audience, this is one of the most critical steps, determining what the specific characteristics of the motivational problems are that you're trying to solve before you move towards solutions. And then the next step is to identify a list of potential tactics, and then from those, select the ones that are most appropriate. Now, in some areas of work, like learning design, once you've identified the problems, there are various kinds of prescriptions that you can follow to come up with solutions. But in motivational design, oftentimes there's more judgment calls to be made. You have to experiment, you have to speculate about the tactics that might be possible to use to accomplish your goals, and then try to implement them. All right, now, the 10-step process is highly successful, and it's very good for curriculum design, for if you have a team of people working together to make improvements in the motivational dynamics of a course, or in working on multiple units of work. But it's a bit too cumbersome, it's a bit too time-consuming for a teacher to use in daily lesson planning activities. Well, several years ago, a former student of mine, he was from Japan, he's now a distinguished professor in Japan, was working at a junior high school in Sendai in northern Japan. And he developed what we call the simplified approach. And in this project, his goal was to test the effectiveness of motivational design versus novelty effects. I mentioned yesterday, when you introduce a new technology or a new gadget, people will be interested at first because of the novelty effect. It's something new, it's something different. But often people become tired of it after a while and it loses its effectiveness. But he wanted to test the degree to which the implementation of computers in various subject matter areas of the classroom had more sustenance, would persist over time and be successful. And so in working with the teachers, he tested the effectiveness of the ARC's motivational tactics and the ARC's design process. But with the teachers, he wanted to develop a more simplified approach that they could use in a practical and quick way in daily projects. So he tested this project and found a high level of satisfaction. In a nutshell, very briefly, his motivational or simplified design process consists primarily of a matrix. This has been used not only in Japan, where it was originally created, but it's been used in the Netherlands, it's been used in the United States, it's been used in Korea, South Korea, and many different contexts. And what it does, it gives you a way to kind of visually represent the key critical elements of the design process. You notice there's a column, one column for attention, one for relevance. Wait a minute. Here we go again. There's a column, I don't know what's going on. Okay, we caught up with each other. Yeah, in this simplified process, there's a column for each of the four major categories of the ARCS model. And then in the left-hand column are design factors. These design factors are what I was talking about a few minutes ago. You can examine the learner characteristics, the characteristics of the learning task itself, the medium of instructional delivery, in this case the computer, the courseware characteristics that are being used, and analyze each of these with respect to its motivational characteristics to identify where there might be problems. Now, in the present example, the teacher was teaching these Japanese junior high school kids how to use the internet. This was like 10, 12 years ago. And he was teaching them, 1985, 18, 19 years ago. So he found that they had, high interest, high commitment, but their confidence was low because of their low typing skills. And in order to use the internet effectively, they had to be able to use English. And there were some problems with satisfaction. Well, as you scan that chart, you can see there are a variety of pluses and minuses listed beside the various characteristics that he described. And then there's an analysis summary at the bottom of the page. You'll notice that 3 of the categories are basically okay. Attention, relevance, students were interested, they were curious, they felt like it was personally useful and important, and they felt okay about satisfaction potential. They felt that they would be happy to learn this, but there were some confidence problems. So the teacher focused on developing strategies that would help them build their confidence. Now, there are 2 types of motivational strategies. One are those that help you sustain learner interest, sustain it. Those would apply to the A, R, and S. And the second category are those that help build motivation when there's a gap or a deficit. That would be under confidence. So with all of these analytical results ready, then we developed a lesson plan template that they could use to incorporate it. This represents a typical type of lesson planning template that your teachers might use. But I've added some information at the top and also a column to list motivational tactics and to show how they're related to the other elements of the learning plan. Now, this has several potential benefits in the teaching process. For example, it combines all of the steps into a single matrix. It presents it promotes a comprehensive review. You can scan these documents and see at a glance where the strengths are and where the areas of improvement are that you need to work on. And then it provides a basis for rejection and selection of tactics. When we first tell teachers to improve the motivational dynamics of the classroom, if you have them list ideas, often they will list far more ideas than they can practically use. So the idea is to not present too many motivational tactics, but present the ones that are most critical in order for the student to be successful in improving learner motivation. And then the most important part of the process, or a key important part of the process, is the analysis itself, and it allows for customization. All right, now, with respect to some motivational challenges, the teacher's motivation is just as important as the student's, and we know that great teachers, part 3, over and over again, the research shows that teachers who are successful tend to exhibit high levels of enthusiasm. Now, enthusiasm on the part of the teacher is a necessary condition for success, but it is not sufficient. Teachers have to have more knowledge and more understanding of the process than that. Now, also, teachers need to be able to analyze their own motivation. Often we know that teachers, as I said earlier, face many personal challenges in maintaining their own motivation. And this is an outline of a checklist that teachers can use to analyze their own motivation. A teacher might say, I've taught this topic, 3 times this week. How can I energize myself to teach it again? Or this is a topic, I have to teach this topic today that does not really interest me. What can I do to stimulate my own interest or to build my own confidence? So this type of self-analysis checklist can be used by teachers to identify their own motivational problems as well as those of students. Now, the next step is to build some, this should be example 1, all right? Example 1. Here's one example of what one teacher did to help, solve some of her own motivational problems with the teaching assignment that she had, and also energize and sustain student motivation. This teacher was in a northeastern part of the United States in New Jersey, and she taught a special class for above average kids. She was a special resource teacher, and it was to teach kids how to do research. This helps build their capacity for self-directed learning. And the students would come to her once every 2 weeks or so. So her challenge was how to build the students' interest, these junior high school kids and elementary school kids, and have them 5th and 6th graders, and sustain their interest throughout the school year. So she would only see them at intervals. What did she do? Well, at the beginning of the semester, the kids were interested. They were interested. This was a special privilege, a special opportunity. So she showed them some examples of projects done by previous students to give them a concrete idea of what they might be able to accomplish. And then in between meetings, when there would be long intervals and she was worried that the kids might lose interest, she would use many, small newsletters and also use tweets or emails so the kids would be communicating with each other and with the teacher. She also chose themes, or helped them choose themes that were relevant to their age group, such as the question of what will I do in the future, and they did their individual research on that. She also allowed them to work in groups and design multimedia presentations together to report some of the things they were finding from their individual research. So in other words, she came up with a list of strategies that she could incorporate to build and sustain the motivation of this group of young children who would not normally be able to sustain their interest over an entire semester, especially with that meeting only every few weeks. All right, another example of a project that helps build a knowledge-relevant society, a knowledge-based society. And this had to do with group problem solving and planning. And this example is from WebQuest. Many of you might be familiar with the WebQuest application that you can use to build lessons. One of my former students, Bernie Dodge, created the WebQuest system, And I thought that was one of a major accomplishment that he was able to contribute to our field. Now, in the example I'm going to give, one of my students at Florida State University worked on the problem of teaching mathematics, especially concepts that students perceive to be irrelevant, such as the concept of pi. Did you know that there's an actual national or international holiday, not a holiday, but a recognition of pi? It's called Pi Day. And when do you think Pi Day is every year? Well, it occurs on March 14th, because pi equals 3.14, March 14th. So if you check the internet, you'll see on Pi Day that there's this international kind of attention giving to the concept of pi. So he was asking himself, how can I teach pi in such a way, this concept, to engage the students in helping to build their own learning environment, helping them to build their own methods for using their knowledge about pi to engage students and other people in wanting to learn about pi. So they decided to have a celebration, a celebration in which they would invite guests, invite other people. And of course, if you're going to, and so he wanted the children to help with all this. Well, if you're going to invite guests, you want to have refreshments. So one of the things he did was to ask the students, how can we determine what shall we have? What shall we have for refreshments? And the students said, let's have pizza. Let's have pizza. And he said, okay, now we have to determine how much pizza to buy. How many guests are we going to have? How many pizzas should we buy? And the next question is, where can we get the best price? Where can we get the least expensive pizza? And somebody said, well, Domino's has it for $11, or Pizza Hut has it for $9. He said, well, yeah, the prices are different, but how do you know which one is actually the least expensive? And so they started thinking about it, and they said, well, it depends upon the size of the pizza and how much it costs per square centimeter. So he said, well, can you figure out how much to charge, how much each pizza costs per square centimeter? And they said, well, no, they're circles. We can't measure the perimeter. And he said, well, let's use pi. So they were able to use pi, of course, to determine the area of the circle, and then divide that into the price to determine how much it costs per square centimeter. So that's just one example of how they could relate the concept of pi to planning their party. And of course, then he had other activities and exercises related to personal experience. So that covers attention and relevance. By seeing how they could use the concept of pi in a practical way, it helped them build their confidence. And he taught it very straightforwardly, no trick questions. And then finally, satisfaction. He let them eat the pizza. What could be more satisfying than that? And he also showed engineers and other people using pi. All right, I have another example, but I'm going to skip it in order to go to my last topic, which is what are the requirements of administrators? I've said that a key component of change is that the people who are most directly responsible for change, that is the teachers and the students themselves, must be intrinsically motivated. Administrators can be motivated, but they have to translate their motivation into activities that support the teachers and build the teachers' intrinsic motivation in order for it to succeed. Now, different models of course, there are many different models of leadership in the management literature of private sector, educational enterprises, and so forth. Now, one of the traditional characterizations of leadership style is to contrast the traditional approach, or captain of my ship. My job as a manager or a leader is to monitor, control the activities in my organization, maintain my distance, and let people do their work. All right? My job is to manage resources and not interfere with what people are doing unless there's a problem. At Syracuse University, when I was at Syracuse University, there was a principal in a local high school that I met with. He was an excellent leader, an excellent manager. The teachers felt very secure and highly supported in their school. But yet, there was something missing. There was something missing. They felt that he was too distant, psychologically distant, physically distant, They didn't see him very often. His philosophy was, well, the teachers are professionals. They know what to do. I don't want to get in their way, so I will leave them alone unless there's a problem. If there's a problem, then I'll go meet with them and see if we can solve the problem. Now, there's a name for this management style. It's called management by exception. Management by exception. I don't interfere with you unless there's a problem. Well, one of the huge weaknesses of that approach is that, yes, the teachers were professionals. Yes, they knew how to manage their classrooms and how to design instruction, but they felt neglected. You know, people like to have their work and their efforts appreciated by somebody else. And so the principal did not have a warm or friendly relationship with the teachers. He did not go out of his way to compliment them on things he had noticed that they were doing. Well, after he became aware of the problems, he changed his behavior to the other leadership style, which is more the transformational approach, or shepherd of my flock, you know, which means you're engaged more in inspiring, guiding, and supporting. In this kind of an environment, the teachers feel supported and are enthusiastic by the principal's more direct involvement in what they're doing. Now there's a huge literature on this, and of course I don't have time to go into all of it today, but the bottom line is that both of these approaches are important. What might be called the traditional approach is important for establishing and maintaining a stable and safe and predictable and well-funded learning environment. The transformational approach is useful for helping to inspire people, develop their intrinsic motivation, and help them want to move forward in bringing about change. Now, what are some of the motivational, contradictory or complementary? As I said, there's a time for both approaches, and one of the classic leadership models is that of situational leadership. It's been around a long time, but it still has a lot of valid points. And basically, situational leadership says that when a group is new or not well experienced in working together, use a more traditional approach until the rules are clear, they become well established, they know what's expected of them, and then you shift to a more relationship-oriented or transformational approach. All right? Now, the successful use of these strategies depends upon the motivational dynamics of teachers and learners. All right, now, the motivational challenges to the administrator. To the administrator says, how do I stimulate teachers' desires to change? How can I provide guidance on how to fulfill these new curriculum requirements associated with a knowledge-based system? How can I help teachers be self-directed in changing their approaches to lesson planning and teaching? In other words, how can I help inspire their own intrinsic motivation to change? How can I help them realize that student-centered learning is not student-controlled learning? This is a misunderstanding that people often make. I remember one time when I was teaching high school, secondary school, you know, in the late 1960s, there was also a school reform movement then that tried to put more responsibilities on the students. A teacher came to class one day and he sat down and didn't do anything. And the students became increasingly uncomfortable. And finally they said, well, Mr. Roberts, what are we supposed to do? And he said, well, what do you want to do? And the students were totally confused. Well, I don't know. Tell us what we should do. So he had a misunderstanding of shifting to a more student-centered approach. He wanted to just turn control over to the students and have them decide what they do. Students still need guidance. They need leadership. They need support. But student-centered means that as the teacher, you set up the conditions, you establish the conditions that give guidance to the students so they know how to proceed. You set up problems for them to work on. You set up a classroom structure that supports their ability to work together as individuals and in groups to apply things they've been learning. So student-centered is very different from student-controlled. And finally, you build student expectations for success among the teachers, giving them a clear understanding of what you're looking for. This is a very important element. All right, and finally, reinforce them for good work. Now, the first steps in change One of the first requirements for anybody to change is to perceive that there's a gap between the way things are now and the way they want them to be. Often we try to implement change when people are perfectly happy with the way things are now. Why should I have to change? Everything I do is working well. So in order to bring about change, you have to create this felt, personally experienced sense of a gap. Things are not as good as they could be. Things are not as good as I would like for them to be. Things are not as good as our group as a whole feel like we want them to be. So you have to create a sense of a gap. After you've done that, then people are more willing to move forward into learning the new things, the new processes that will be required to close the gap. All right, now, the ARCS model also serves as an orienting device for some of the traditional and newer leadership strategies, management strategies that can be used to both maintain a well-organized system and to inspire people to change. In 1992, Tom Peters published a book called In Search of Excellence. Even though the book is old, it still has a lot of valid principles that we can use. He examined highly successful corporations that had been successful over a period of many years, and they examined those to determine what are some of the things they do that help sustain this excellence over a long period of time. And he mentioned that one of the things they do is effectively communicate policies, goals, and interesting events. It was ironic when AT&T, AT&T used to be a monopoly in the United States, and I was doing consulting work with them when they began to divest. They were required by the government to break apart into smaller companies. Now, AT&T is a communications company, but within that company, people were totally confused about what was happening. Am I going to lose my job? What are my new responsibilities going to be? What kinds of changes are we undertaking? The management structure was not communicating to the people in the company what to expect and how things might change. Now, that's an example from a corporation, but similar problems occur within school systems. Principals change, superintendents change, and people don't know what's going to be expected within the new system. So it's very important to communicate policies and procedures down to all levels. It's also important to communicate your enthusiasm. Sometimes administrators are too remote. They're not outwardly enthusiastic about the new principles. So you have to be a cheerleader, as they say, as well as they provide guidance for what will be done. For relevance, there are many things you can do to help build a sense of relevance for the new policies, new procedures, and the kinds of things you're doing. Provide opportunities and guidance for goal setting, for tangible accomplishments so people know when they've actually made progress. Be visible. Peters called it management by walking around, to support the values. Be out, administrators should be out there where people can see you. Gordon Hirschberger, the principal I was talking about, learned that he should walk the hallways. He should notice things that that teachers have done and make positive comments about them in order to reinforce them, and then provide opportunities for professional development. All right, I'm just about finished. The next thing is to support collaborative planning. Under confidence, some ideas. Replace management by exception with active management. Provide feedback on performance. Often we have either no reviews by our supervisors, or maybe it's once a year. But highly successful managers are circulating with their teachers. They're aware of what the teachers are doing, and they find opportunities to congratulate them for successful activities and to help assist them when they need help in order to improve their behavior. And simply acknowledging the challenges of a teacher's tasks to make them know that you're aware of the challenges they're facing and that you appreciate what they're doing is extremely helpful. And then satisfaction. Here's another list, and these are, again, described in some of my writings. I have a paper about using the ARCS model in a management environment. And an important thing is to maintain equity. Help teachers realize that they're being treated fairly and equitably within your system. So in conclusion, I want to say that the transition to a knowledge-based curriculum requires changes in perspectives. It requires new skills, new attitudes, and a willingness to participate in the process. It requires integrated and intrinsic interest and motivation on the parts of the teachers, the students, the administrators who are going to inspire and guide the teachers in the system into the new approaches. It requires an understanding of the policymakers, such as the people in the Ministry of Education, to appreciate the many challenges that are faced from all the way down the line from the teachers and students as well as administrators, so they're providing appropriate support. And one of the bottom line points to remember is this is an exciting time to try to bring about these kind of changes, because there are so many resources available to us that we can access and use very inexpensively. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor John. Actually, there is no time for questions because we have another session after 10 minutes. شكرا لكم جميعا على الحضور، والوقت للمحاضرة كان مقرر يكون 10 دقائق للأسئلة والمداخلات، ولكن طول المحاضرة أخذ الوقت كاملا. نشكر لكم حضوركم ونراكم إن شاء الله في محاضرة أخرى. شكرا.